Thank you very much for everybody for coming and for the organizers. Futures for All has pretty much been my watchword for the last 30 or 35 years, and now particularly because I'm going to start with a little audience participation. I'm going to ask you to look around the room. You don't have to be, it's not, look around. Come on, turn your head, see all the people who are here. I agree with the former speaker, a lot of young people, a lot of vibrant and energetic people who are not here. Okay, this is not a hard question. Who are not here?
Our children.
Our children, our students, and their teachers, and their administrators. We have been working in this field for a very, very long time, and the field has grown. I want to thank Miguel on giving a much prettier version of how this field has started in the 1950s and is going on today. We have more than 500 people in the Association of Professional Futurists who are identified as futurists in the world, who identify themselves as that. When we started that association in 2002, there were 15. So we have a framework that we use to teach graduate students. We do certificate programs. We have public speeches and corporate seminars throughout the world. Thousands of people are learning about this. But of course, the people who are not learning about this are the students. And I want to make a distinction then between this approach, which is the approach of, how does it go back? Oh, there I go. Sorry, I didn't hit the right button. This approach, which is for graduate students, corporate seminars, adults who need to do the future, versus these people who need to simply think about the future. And in the process of having taught graduate students and doing these corporate seminars and things like that, I've realized that you don't have to be able to do scenarios or plans as a professional in order to get the insights to change and the future that we get when we do that. Now, we've done books on that process. One is a middle school book, Futures Thinking Playbook, right here. One is a high school workshop on doing scenarios, and these are fine because they're cohesive, cradle-live, start from scratch. But does every teacher need to have to go through every time putting students through a scenario process or a planning process? So I'm in the process right now of rethinking what we need to teach Futures for All, which is the takeaway, the bottom line. What we know, and we can use these exercises for points, but we're not preparing professional futurists. We're doing futures thinking or futures literacy. You don't have to know how to do a double account bookkeeping to know how to save money, what you're paying on your credit card, how much it's going to cost you to buy a house. Those kinds of things we should all know as adults. And those are the kinds of things, and we should be teaching all this stuff in school. So let's turn then to, we learned about the future in school. Believe it or not, we did. How many people took an actual course on the future in school? I can't raise my hand because I didn't. Anybody here took a course on the future? No. But we learned how to think about the future anyway, unfortunately, incorrectly. First place we learned about the future was in science class. The future is predictable in science class. You can actually do the calculation, and when you do the calculation and you do the experiment and you end up with the same result, you get a good grade. That's what the science is. And so we thought, well, we can predict the pendulum and the moon and physics. Why can't we predict the economy? People generalize to that and think the future should be predictable. We also learned about the future by studying the past. In history, how do we learn about the past? As one person said, an historian said, the past is just one damn thing after another. It just goes on and on, one event. But it's 1, 2, 3 all together. There's no alternatives. There's no uncertainties. It's an inevitable future. So you take predictability and inevitability together, and it's no wonder people think that they can understand the future and they know the future and they should be able to do the future, until, of course, they take a social science class. Now, as a sociologist, I can tell you, social scientists don't know much about, in fact, they know too much about change and the future because there are about 10 or 20 different ways of doing it. And there's not one way as there is in physics or history or math. There's all kinds of ways. So now people are confused. They're even confused further because they took a statistics class. Wow, there the future is even random. It's like a roulette wheel or a pair of dice. I can't understand the future. So now we have two subjects which taught about predictability and two other subjects which taught about the indeterminism and randomness. And then we had a fifth way of learning the future, and that was from our parents, our teachers, our preachers, our mentors, and every motivational speaker you've ever had the delight to listen to. What's their message? You can have any future you want if you know, if you believe it, and you work hard enough for it, which is not true. You can have some of it, but you can't have all of it. So if you're confused, welcome to the club. Is the future predictable and inevitable, or is it uncertain and even random? Is the future handed to us from the world, or do we actually choose a future that we want to work for? And that's why it's not taught in school, because teachers do not teach anything that they're confused about. And well, they shouldn't. But we now have, in this field, for the last 50 years, developed an approach to thinking about the future that solves this confusion and answers a lot of the questions that have already come up this morning. I have to tell Isabella, why didn't she know about strategic forecast earlier? Because she didn't hear it in school, and she should have heard it in school. So what I'm about to share with you is what I'll call probably the most boring set of stuff in this whole conference, because you know it already. Many of you are professional futurists. Everyone here is at least interested in futures for all. So I'm not going to reveal anything that you don't already know. So I'm going to ask you to put a mindset together in your mind and say, what if we really were teaching our students these things? Wouldn't they be better at preparing for their own lives, their families, their communities, participating as citizens and employees? So we're doing like an experiment. And this is, frankly, you're being treated to the very first version of this. I've thought about this stuff, I've taught it a lot, but in this form, I've never presented it to a group. As I always said the first time I taught a class, you are the benefits of enthusiasm over experience. So now we're going to get to see, and I want you to be thinking all the time, why aren't we teaching this stuff in school? And there are 3 units here. We need to teach about change, we need to teach about change in the world, and we need to teach about changes that we create ourselves. Just those 3 things, those 3 units, that concept is something that I think would help our students go forward. I'm going to run through those 3 units and then conclude a little bit. First of all, what about change? As Helena said, we don't teach about change. Sociologists don't teach about change. Anthropologists don't teach about change. Even historians don't teach about change. They teach about differences. So this time was different than our time, or this time was different than another time. Hardly any people are talking about what's called the through line, or the history of change. And so we're doing that. I looked at the top 10 intro to sociology textbooks on Amazon. I looked at the table of contents. Every single one of them had a chapter on social change, 1 out of 15 chapters, and it was always the last chapter. Come on. You don't get to the last chapter in any textbook, in any course. And so we're really not doing change very well. So what are the things that we need to learn about change? The first thing is that there is an inbound change that comes to us from the world. You sit down at the card table and you get a hand, that's inbound change. You can't say, oh, I don't want that. This is 2019. It's not 2018. It's not 1919. It's not 1959. This is the hand we're dealt, and this is the hand we have to play. And yet, we're not victims of those changes. We also have outbound change. We can influence the future. We can't probably change in any gigantic way the tremendous problems that people treated us to this morning, but we can change ourselves, we can change our families, we can begin through the action and the activism that they discussed to begin to have an effect on the world. It's both of those. So each of these influences the other. What we do influences the world, and what the world does influences us, and they both have limits by each other. That's a really sophisticated concept, but it's a little bit better than what people think. Either, oh, I'm a total victim, and there's nothing I can do about it, or I'm completely in charge, and I can get anything I want. It's both of those, and it's neither of those. And that, to me, is something we should be talking to our students about. What's something else we want to know about change is how fast it occurs or what the type of change it is. And there's two categories. It's a spectrum. There's continuous change, which we call trends. You know, if you ask people about the future, what they'll tell you about is mostly the result of trends. More computers, more climate change, more people, more economic growth, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, whatever. You ask them about the past, they don't talk about trends very much at all. We don't learn those in history class. What do we learn? We learn about the disruptions. We learn about revolutions and new technologies and wars and heroes and villains and all of that kind of stuff, the interesting stuff. Where have we passed a law? There are no more disruptions? There are no more events? Well, of course not. Here's a list of events, of disruptions that have happened in the last 50 years. And there's probably the list longer than that. Each of those had a profound effect on industry, on business, on employment, and each had a profound effect on life itself. Our lives are different because of these disruptions. How do we prepare people for a world in which they don't think about disruptions because they can't predict them? Well, what we do, of course, is we populate the world with hypothetical disruptions. We give people the what if. Well, what if this and what if that? Now, scientists don't like that because there's no evidence for that. But yet that's the practice that we're doing to be ready for whatever disruption occurs. If none of the disruptions we have in our scenarios still turn out wrong, we're still ready. We're flexible. We're resilient. We're ready for kind of change. And in that sense, we're doing them a service. What happens when one of those disruptions happens? Well, if you're in the old era, in the current era, then basically we talk about trends. More of this, less of that, goes on and on and on. And then something happens, boom, and we start a process of transition from the current era to a new era. Wouldn't it be nice to give students the concept that they're in an era today, that their parents and grandparents lived in a different era, and that they and their children are going to live in another era, and what might that be like? Give them the sense that the present, as I always talk about, is a temporary condition. That's a scary thought, because we really feel better about the present than we do about, nobody wants to change places with the past, and very few people want to change places with the future because we're afraid, we're familiar, we know this one. But giving them the sense that enjoy it while you can, but disruptions are bound to happen, and they will change your life. Are you ready for that? Are you ready for that? We get into, finally, the new era. And then you stick these things together, and you get a model of change, which we borrow from biological evolution, and it's called punctuated equilibrium. Go along for a while, boom. Go along for a while, boom. And so the going along is what we understand and are familiar with, and the boom is not, because then we're always surprised. This is what we should be teaching students in all of that time. And finally, not to overemphasize, there's a group of people in my field which I call the breathless futurists. They can't even take a breath. Change. Some things don't change, folks. It's okay, you know. We're still what we are. We're still human beings. We still live in families for the most part. We still do this and that. So let's talk about the big changes that are coming for sure. But let's not overdo it. So this could be a unit in school. It would take a lot longer than the 5 minutes that I've had, but that is the kind of stuff that I would recommend we be teaching our students. Let's turn to the second unit, inbound change. And this is the fundamental principle of future studies and strategic foresight, which is different than any other kind of thing. It is not predictable. There's no one future. There is no one future that we should be trying to pick it out. And therefore, the future is many, not one. We're dealing with a set of futures, not one future. Again, teaching students to think about multiples and alternatives. One of the problems of education is that you get A's by getting the right answer, by getting the right solution. There is no right answer in most of the problems we've been talking about here. There is no one solution in all of the problems we've been talking about here. And in that sense, we're treating them and we're getting ready to work in a world that's more complex than the way we've talked about it in school. So is it predictable or not? It's both. There is an expected future. If you take all the trends and all the plans that influential stakeholders have on the record, and all the assumptions that we make about change, and you run them out to any year you want to talk about, there is a future there. It is the expected future. It's not probable. It's not guaranteed. And certainly it's not going to happen in any great detail. But that's where we start. So we use social science. We use logic. We use science to tell us where we're headed. But of course, there are alternative futures. And the what-if thinking is after we do the expected, what if that trend stops? What if this event occurs? What if this invention comes along? Then we're talking about alternative futures. And each of these futures is driven by the steep categories that Miguel talked about. And we use those. We should teach students that it's not a simple source of not just technology. It's not just money. It's not just political power. It is all of those things interacting together. In fact, it's people transform resources using technology into economic goods and waste products under government regulation in a cultural matrix. And every one of those things has subcategories, as Miguel pointed out. That's a complicated world. Notice how we are leaving the security and the safety of narrow specialization, and we're dropping people into the deep end of the pool, where the simplifications don't work. The simplifications, I'm just going to be an economist, or I'm just going to be a technologist, or I'm just going to be a business person. No, the future is a function of all of these steep categories all going on simultaneously. And each of these two futures requires a different mindset and a different process for getting to the result. Logic and science, data, and extrapolation get us to the expected future. Speculation, that's a dirty word in school if it isn't one. Imagination, creativity gets us to the alternative futures. Without those thinking styles, we will always get the expected future. We'll always get the one that we think is going on. So that's my second unit. First unit on change, the second unit on inbound change. But as I said, we are not, I forgot about this, our famous cone of plausibility. People have shown this morning already. There's the baseline, the expected future right down the middle, the expanding cone of plausible futures out there in space. That should be up in every single class in social science, in literature, in technology. But unit 3, we're not victims. We do have power. We do have resources and talents and time which we can devote towards that last future, the preferred future. Again, science and logic bring expected. Imagination and creativity bring alternatives. Values and preferences bring the third. We don't talk about values in school. We want students to have good values, but it never comes up. Wouldn't it be nice for them to say, I like this future better than that, and then to go back and say, why is that? What is the value set that you're promoting versus somebody else's? What's the value set that the world is promoting versus the one that you like? And you set up the empowerment that was discussed this morning that Aletha put so strongly to us. And the cone has a visionary future as part of it as well. So all three futures are represented in here, and that preferred future requires us to make choices, to identify our values. We can't have it all. We can have some, and we can have some maximum, and we therefore have others. So that kind of sophisticated thinking is something that I would definitely put into the classroom. And how do we create outbound change? This is not new to you. We need leaders. We need people who step up and say, this is a preferred future, and I am prepared to work for it. Will you come with me? Enrolling them in the campaign to create a better world? Of course we need that. And every student in school should aspire to be a leader of some sort. Not like Greta and changing the world, but doing something for themselves, their community, their family, their school that they're not doing. They have a vision. Planning is essential. Getting folks together. What are we going to do this? How are we going to do this? And then finally, actual action, which is what Britt talked about this morning, that particular last step of creating change and giving us a better mental health step. When we are in action, we are moving towards that preferred future. 3 units: change, inbound change, outbound change. You knew it all already. What we haven't thought about as a society is how to put this into classrooms, how to put this into the school. This is the way I propose to teachers Just ask these questions. Understand the present. How did we get this way in the present and from the past? What do we expect to happen? What might happen instead? What do you prefer to happen? And what are you going to do about it? This is not rocket science. This is not a master's degree in future studies. I challenge every teacher to have that particular set of questions ready whenever they're dealing with some kind of a subject. So the bottom line is that we want to create students who know how to not predict change and not even do scenarios, but be ready for change when it occurs, to be resilient and anticipatory, the way Isabella talked about it, to anticipate new things and get ready for change in whatever form, and to be able to be strong enough and courageous enough to believe that they can influence change and they can actually make a difference in this world. What if we had empowered citizenry? Most of the problems we've been talking about this morning would not be nearly as severe, and some of them might not even exist. So we ask students to be aware of change, accept that it's headed somewhere, but it could end up somewhere else. Thinking contingently and with uncertainty. Notice how the one right answer school set, the school culture, is so much against that. What if? It depends. There is no one right answer. Be optimistic. We do have power. Set a vision and pursue that vision throughout one's life. We talk about legacy. A legacy is something that somebody realizes or leaves late in their life. Wouldn't it be wonderful that a teenager or a young adult would imagine, this is my legacy, this is what my life is going to be about, and I'm going to commit to that. Not that they're going to drive off of cliffs or smash into walls, but my life's meaning is going to be about doing this X, Y, and Z, this trying to implement this vision in my life. And in that sense, we want to prepare students for tomorrow by teaching the future today. So I'm in the business of recruiting people to this campaign, and you're now my victims. What I want, and we're going to have a little audience participation right here. Anybody who believes that we should be teaching some of this in schools should stand up right now. Anybody who believes that. Okay? All right. All right? You don't need to stand up. We're not taking roll, whatever. If you stay standing. And now clap if you like this idea. Please, come on, clap, clap, clap. Come on.